welcome back to the Northern Sentinels podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ayotte. On this episode, I speak with Canadian businessman and philanthropist Weyburn Goranson. Wayne is the fifth generation of his family to be born and raised on the family farm in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. He went to university for engineering and since then has been involved with defense, oil and gas, agriculture, and data and information management. Along the way, he has spent a significant amount of time and money giving back to those in need. He has done this around the globe and in his own backyard, Saskatchewan. He's truly a great Canadian, and I'm so thankful he took the time to share his story. I appreciate you listening to the NSP, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Weyburn Goranson. Wayne, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thanks. Hey, thanks, man. And good to meet you.
You as well. And before we hit record here, you're just giving me a bit of a tour of your place in Saskatoon. And for those who haven't been to Saskatoon, it's the South Saskatchewan River.
Yeah, we have the South Saskatchewan River coming through the center, and we have, it's the first and largest agricultural college in Canada, and where I attended engineering.
And you have this beautiful view from where you live across the river in the city.
I'm sitting, you would have to pay a few $1 million in any other city in the world. That's
fantastic. So I've only been to Saskatoon a couple of times. I mean, what do you love about the city?
Well, there's many things. It's different than Regina. Regina is a government city, as is Ottawa. Saskatoon supports a lot of industries and some of the largest mining companies in the world. And also my only son lives here with his wife, so happy about that. And we have this wonderful University of Saskatchewan, which is a proud kilometer up the road here from me. And, the winters are not terribly nice. but I have this view out to the southwest. At 3:00 yesterday morning, we had a thunderstorm go through here, and I'm lucky I have floor-to-ceiling glass and watched these thunderstorms cruise through sheet lightning.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know, were you ever, Chris, out to CFB Dundurn?
I was, yeah, a couple times.
Yeah. And so I don't know if you saw the deal on the table today, but 87,300 munitions are going from CFB Dundurn to Ukraine.
I did. I think that was part of Minister Blair's announcement.
It was not. It was not explicit exactly where it was coming from. And I'm trying to think, because I know they've closed the runway out there, how they're going to manage that. That they will.
They'll find a way.
It'll get out of Saskatoon. There'll be some Hercules come here, or C-100s, and off to Ukraine.
So if someone was going to come to Saskatoon, Wayne, what would your hidden gem be? Would you say you have to hit this?
Yeah. Right across the street from about 100 meters from where I am is this rich museum. So Joni Mitchell's father was the founder.
Okay.
And he was a great entrepreneur and traveled the world in the 50s. And that's where the Picassos came from. And then she was here and then went to Winnipeg and went on to great fame. So that museum in Saskatoon would be one of the things I would absolutely recommend you have to do. And then there's a few restaurants here and there that, I would advise. And the university as well is a fantastic gem of this province. And, when Saskatchewan was incorporated as a province in 1905, we were the third most populous place in Canada, Quebec, Ontario, and Saskatchewan, because we had all these immigrants that they had brought from Europe to pay for the railroad. And Yeah. So, I was just driving down the street today with a dear friend and noticing these incredible Art Deco buildings that were built in the 1920s.
Hmm.
And, there's also the Besborough Hotel, which I would recommend to anyway. It's a Scottish Gothic design and building. And that's another thing I would recommend to people. And then we have this wonderful river out here, which is a lot of activities. And
You know what? I love this sort of insight into a city because one of the previous podcast guests was certainly encouraging people to get out and travel. But he said, you know what? Like, get out and see Canada. There's so many amazing parts of Canada that most Canadians don't get to see. He said, you can just travel in your own backyard and discover some incredible parts of your own country.
Well, and that's something that was, I have traveled the world. And, there's very few places that you could guess that I have not been. And then during the pandemic, we were contained. And so my wife, Heather, and I decided, well, let's just enjoy Saskatchewan. And there is so much richness, so much history. People think of Saskatchewan as this flat plain land, which in the southern part is, but you have to go 120 kilometers north of me to be at the middle point of this province. And, Saskatchewan has 1/3 of Canada's fresh water in those lakes up there, even more than the Great Lakes. And Canada has 1/3 of the world's fresh water. And so just going, and my father, he grew up, on the prairies, and then he went up north and got to enjoy this wonderful Canadian Shield that's up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's and we have in Saskatchewan Canada's largest desert up south of Lake Athabasca.
I did not know that.
I've been there one time, and it's a great treat. So there's a lot of diversity here, and people think of just that flat prairie, but it's more than that. And so, this province was founded and developed from the north to the south. So the voyageurs, they came from Lake Winnipeg, and then they came into the lake systems and river systems, and worked their way in buying, I guess we'd buy beaver pelts or something. And we were thinking of that the other day, that what a hard job that was as a young Quebecois or a French person. And, they even brought pianos in here. We were talking about, to my cousin, an upright grand piano, probably weighed 2,000 pounds in a canoe. And, just amazing. And, I was reading in their history that their ration was 7 pounds of moose meat a day. And, because there was no starch available, full thing. So they just ate moose meat. And I can't imagine the stench that came out of those.
7 pounds of meat a day. That's a good effort.
Yeah. But that's all they were doing was paddling, and they came right down this river right here. And that's how our province got discovered.
So you're in Saskatoon right now, but you're not from Saskatoon.
No, I was born in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. And
Weyburn is down. Is it on the Yellowhead?
No, Weyburn is on the very southeast. So It's on the Soo Line. And they built the Soo Line Railroad to come from Chicago to Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and then out to the prairies because the Americans hadn't built a railroad yet, and Canada needed that railroad to keep us as country, and so my ancestors came up in 1885 they came from Sweden and then to Minneapolis or to Minnesota, and they didn't pay off the railroad enough to have it come through their town. It went through the next town, so they realized their gig was up, and they had 9 children, and they came up to Weyburn, and it was originally just the men came, and I'm thinking of writing a story about this, and I'm just running out of time. But the first night that they spent on the land which our family has, they turned over a wagon, and that was their shelter, and that was in 85, and in 1929 they had built a home which I grew up in. It had probably about 4,000 square feet, doesn't matter, but it had electricity and flush toilets, a wind turbine that charged batteries in the basement. My grandfather had built a dam with a spillway, so they had water, and a horse barn, and he had 80 horses to work at the farm. They had come up to other areas of the province and investigated, and they found that there was, where are the stones? What are we going to build with? And consequently, I spent the first 20 years of my life picking stones out of fields. So, I have mixed emotions about that decision.
So you grew up on the original family homestead.
5 generations.
Wow.
And that's where I spent the first 20 years of my life. And another interesting part of our family evolution at Weyburn was that, so my parents were both Lutheran, and in those days you went to town on Wednesday to get married. I don't know why. That was just the deal. And so they probably put on their best clothes, and the Lutheran minister was out of town, and they found the Baptist minister who would marry them. And he said, "No problem, I'll marry you, but you got to join our church." And
but there's a catch.
Yeah, it was. And so they did, and they joined that church and were faithful members. And then Thomas Clement Douglas became the pastor of that church.
Tommy Douglas.
And my grandfather was his campaign manager in my first campaign. And Tommy married my parents in the house I grew up in. And he had left the church. Well, he got elected and was not our pastor. I think he left in 1944 to form government in Saskatchewan. But he would come back once a year and give a sermon. I wasn't a real fan to go to church, just saying. And but he would come, and his speeches were captivating. He was the best storyteller you can imagine. And of course, that's what led him to leadership and elections. And so he came back, until his death every year to that church. And
storytelling, so powerful.
It is. Well, if you think about it, Chris, that's how humans survived for centuries, around the fire, telling stories, having to be clear and truthful and correct. And I think it's part of what we need to do.
I think this is the One of the very selfish reasons that I started this podcast and I love it so much is I get to hear people's stories.
Yeah. And so I grew up in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and, it was kind of an odd event. I only went to university because my friends were going to university, and I signed up and I was hoping to be a physician. And I lived with a bunch of guys, and it was just a party place. And when you're with five guys that you've known most of your life, there's always a reason to part. So I started in September, but by Christmas, I realized I needed a new place to live. I was doing a power dive into my grades. And then just at the end of the second semester, the dean of arts and sciences took me over. He said, "Young man, you are in need of a challenge." And I know Roy Ludwig. He's the dean of engineering, and let's go and see him. So, and I didn't really know that. I thought engineering was driving a train, but they put me into school there, and it was my inspiration, and where also I met my bride, and great experience.
So, if you hadn't ended up in university, I mean, what was the family business? Was it agriculture?
Well, it's an interesting story. My family came from, in Minnesota, they had a general store, and they had some money. And so they came to Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and they bought a lot of land. It was just at a time when, lots of settlers were giving up their land, and they actually bought 50,000 acres. And if you research it, Chris, it's the Weyburn Security Land Company.
Okay.
And so so then they came to Weyburn, and they bought 50,000 acres of land, and they rented some and sold some, and that was their business. Then they had the general store and lumber yard, and they had a safe, and people started coming to them and saying, I got $50, and I'm worried somebody's going to steal it on my homestead, and can I put it in your safe? And then they started thinking, we should start a bank.
Right.
And so if you research the Weyburn Security Bank, different from the land company, it was the first and only bank that could print their own notes in Saskatchewan. And there's actually the Weyburn Security Act.
Really?
And they have, you can buy a $5 banknote now for, I think it's about $25,000. But anyway, that was our family. And then in 1929, there was this event. Yeah. And so they lost basically everything.
Oh, no.
And so if I had not gone to engineering school, I would have continued on. Well, a couple of things happened. Is when they lost all of the land, they were very clever Swedish guys, and they did not release the mineral rights, which means you could have the oil below. And there was, they didn't know it then, but oil was discovered. And so that was part of our family. And so we had two businesses, and that was agriculture and drilling for oil. And I could have gone either way. Well, I did go both ways. And it was great of my father. He didn't encourage me one way or the other, or to go to school. And so I went off to Saskatoon, and became an agricultural engineer. And so there was 220 of us in the class of engineering, and there were 6 females. One day in third year, my study mate in calculus, and he was just so interested in my wife's roommate, and they wanted to go on a date, but they were very shy. And I had only met my wife once before that, just casually in passing. And I said, well, let's go with them. We'll go to the pub, which is what you did then, right?
Yeah.
And we sat on one side of the table and let them have their privacy on the other side. They had one date. It crashed and burned. And 43 years later, I still have that wonderful woman in my life. So I married, let me think, 20% of the women in engineering school.
Is she from Saskatchewan originally?
She's from northeast Saskatchewan. That's where, very close to where she was born, is where we keep our summer house.
Right.
And we go there for respite, and we have 5 acres of beautiful, not on the shield, but it's close to the shield. So clean water, nice spruce trees. That's where we go for solace.
So you were talking about how Saskatchewan was developed from sort of north to south, which is interesting. I'd never heard that before. Was her family part of the, whether it be that original development or the immigrants who came in from Europe who were doing that sort of really hard scrabble farming in the north?
More of the hard scrabble farming. And so in let me think about this, 85, the government of Saskatchewan had a program and sponsorship that each municipality could get funding to write a book and stories of all the immigrants and people that came. And so it's out there. And I didn't know this, but I researched her grandfather, who was from Norway. So just to go back to it, my wife, Heather, is half Norwegian and is also the Norwegian consul for Saskatchewan. And
okay.
The Norwegians, before they had wealth, had all these sailors and business people out there, and they couldn't afford to have their own representation in all these jurisdictions. So they had what are they called? Honorary consuls. And so Heather became honorary consul 20 years ago in Saskatchewan. And then last 2 years ago, King Harold actually made her a knight.
Oh, that's cool.
And so her grandfather came from Norway. He was 16 years old, and there were Norwegian guys in Regina that were building houses, and they needed workers, and so they would send passage to these young boys who wanted an adventure. And I think the deal was, we'll send you passage, you work for a year or two, and then you get your citizenship and you're off on your own. And so Olaf, he came from Norway, and they booked him a ticket on the Titanic, and he got to, I think it was Belfast, or it might have been another place where it departed. Anyway, and it was oversold. Said, sorry, you can't go on the Titanic. Everybody wants to go on the Titanic. And they put him on another ship. Thanks God. And we all know what happened there. And he made it to Montreal on the ship he was on. And then he took, it was called an immigrant train from Montreal to Regina, Saskatchewan. And if you can imagine where we put our bag up in an aircraft, that's where he was sleeping.
Oh,
yeah,
like a little bunk up in the top.
A little bunk up at the top.
Oh,
and then he made it to Regina, and it's interesting. Now we have internet and we have instant news of everything that happens. And he got to a hotel in Regina, and the newspaper said the Titanic has sunk. That was 2 weeks before.
Yeah, I wonder what that felt like. Well,
and he was also in the ship which sailed right by the Titanic. So the radio operator at midnight had turned off his signals, because I guess they had no replacement on the boat grandfather was on. And because the icebergs were all gone, and they sailed right past the sinking Titanic.
No kidding.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm sure there was some hard feelings from that ship's crew.
Okay.
Where did you serve?
So I was enrolled in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And that's where I did my high school. And I've served, a bunch of places around the country and around the world. So I guess primarily in Canada, most of my time has been divided between Edmonton, Gagetown, which is just outside Fredericton, New Brunswick, Kingston, Ontario. Those are probably the three main locations where I spent my time. I had a few years in Petawawa, just north of Ottawa. And then a number of spots overseas, from the Balkans to Afghanistan and the Middle East. So it was, always on the move somewhere.
Yeah, that's got to be a challenge in trying to keep a family together also, right?
Yeah, I think like any career or any life that's fairly dynamic with moves, it works well until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And there's a point, and hopefully you're paying attention and you can start to see when it's not starting to work well before it's really not working well. And I think my wife and I were paying enough attention that we figured out when it wasn't going to be working well anymore, and made some decisions to make it a little more stable, which I like to think worked out pretty well.
Yeah, my cousin flew Hercules through his career, so started in Portage la Prairie, and I think a little bit of time in Moose Jaw, and then in Trenton, and in trying to remember in Germany. Anyway, spent a lot of time there, and then they realized it just wasn't working for him and the kids.
Yeah,
Lahr, Germany.
Lahr. Yeah, I think that's. The way I look at it is, if you're a young Canadian and you serve for 3 years and then you want to go do something else, great. You serve for 3 years. That's fantastic.
It is. And you know what? We'll go on with our dialogue, but I was thinking about this 5 days ago. I guess it's 80 years since, 2,400 Saskatchewan farm boys lost their life at D-Day.
Is that many?
It's yes.
That's a staggering number, because I think that there was 14,000 Canadians went ashore on D-Day.
18,000, yeah. And it's a stunning number, but we were a very populous province, and lots of young farm boys, and about 150 meters from where I would sleep in Regina at night is the memorial, and I go there very often, and just think of their dedication and their commitment, and what the hell. My father's uncle, born in Sweden, became an American citizen in Minneapolis, came to Saskatchewan, went to the U.S. military to fight in France. I'm sure he didn't speak a word of any of his commanders, and died there. Like, what? Crazy. Anyway, where I was going with all of that is I just was thinking about this on the D-Day Memorial. Thank you for your service.
I think you start service with a whole bunch of different reasons. Some people just want a job. Some people want adventure. But I think you start to realize, or at least I hope people start to realize, that, service becomes so meaningful because of what you're serving. The citizens of your nation is really what it's all about.
You're serving the values of your nation.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't realize that if we don't fight for that, it could disappear. It could disappear faster than it appeared.
It's so true. It's not a status quo. It's not something that is guaranteed or will endure without putting the effort into keep the foundation solid.
Yeah, we enjoy it, and it's wonderful. But we have to work for it, and thank you for working for it. There's all I'll say.
All right. engineering. So you and Heather in engineering. What did you decide to do with your engineering degrees when you graduated?
Well, interesting story. It was 1983. It was an economic crisis. Well, first of all, no, it was an economic crisis. Yeah. And I got offered a job in Saskatchewan, and my bride got offered a job in Calgary. And so we went different directions. And I tell a story because it's come full circle in the last few months. There was a guy in a little town in Melfort, Saskatchewan, that owned the car dealership, and Heather had a degree and a job offer and about $6. Somehow he figured out a way to finance a car for her, and so off she drove into the distance to go to this job in Calgary, and I didn't know if I'd ever see her again. And now, full circle, he moved to Regina. His daughters have become very close friends of ours. He is the largest General Motors dealership in North America. He has 14 dealerships. And
are they all in Saskatchewan?
No, in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and California.
Okay.
And anyway, it's just interesting how the circle comes around. And
it is a small world.
It is.
You bump into those sort of moments like that.
And so, yeah, exactly. And these wonderful people, well, we had another reason for meeting. It's beautiful. Anyway, so then I continue my engineering career, and I decide to go into the family oil business, drilling for oil wells, and made a proposal to Heather. Let's get married, and both being engineers, you have to have the discussion, right? And and so, okay, I will quit my job in Saskatchewan, come to Calgary, and when children come, you can finish your job and I'll keep working, and that's just how we'll do it. That was 1986, and so we talked to her boss, and everything is just great. And we bought 2 backpacks, and we went to Europe for 3 months. And there was no internet or cell phones, and we just got married. We didn't really care, and traveled around and had a wonderful time. Came back to Canada and found out that the price of oil had gone to $9. And so I was unemployed, and Heather had I think 1 or 2 days of work at her previous employer.
Were you both working in the petrochemical sector as engineers?
At that time, we were. And so she then became an Earl's girl. I don't know, do you have Earl's restaurants out there?
No, I miss Earl's from
you knew it from
Edmonton, BC.
Yeah. And anyway, so she became an Earl's girl. Slinging drinks.
So Earl's is a restaurant for those who haven't been out west. It's I'm not sure how far it goes east. I think maybe Winnipeg.
I think that's it. There's a couple in the States, one in Phoenix and one in Miami. But anyway, so Heather became a server at Earl's, and still talks about the day she got a 21-cent tip.
Thanks, mister.
Yeah. Anyway, and then I had to scramble to make ends meet, and I ended up being a surveyor I ended up being a rodman for a surveyor who worked for an engineer who I was his boss.
Oh, so you weren't even working the geotech or whatever it was?
Not then. No, I was scrambling. I was holding the rod up, exactly. And one day, the surveyor came to me and said, "You used to sign my paycheck. What happened?" And I said, "I got married."
Were you in Calgary at this time?
At that time, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we were just talking about this the other night, that I think after 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we had saved enough money to go to a movie and have popcorn.
After 3 or 4 weeks.
Or
Yeah.
maybe it was a little more. And anyway, it was Ghostbusters.
Okay.
First edition. It was, I don't know.
Was it worth the months-long savings to go see Ghostbusters?
No, we went on a Tuesday night, so it was 2-Bit Tuesday.
Yeah, cheap Tuesdays. It used to be.
Yeah.
Toony Tuesdays or Looney Tuesdays.
Yeah, exactly. And then popcorn was probably a couple of bucks. Anyway, it was just an outing. It was absolutely special, and not a great movie, just saying. But
so when did things start to turn then? Like, when did you sort of get off holding the survey rod, and what was the next sort of bound?
Well, that was a real turning point for us. We realized, okay, we can't count on somebody to look after us. We have to get out there and hustle our buns and get things done, and it worked. Have to build up a bit of a nest egg and do that. And then I got a job with Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard sent me to Long Beach, California, to do commissioning. You know what the phalanx system is?
I do. Yeah, it's a Gatling gun, minigun system.
Exactly. And so they were commissioning that on their destroyers, and we had some software that was very useful for that, and that was a lot of fun.
So how did you go from working in the petrochemical side to now working with HP and software for weapon systems?
I had some interfaces with HP, and I just applied for a job, and they said, "Oh, you've taken this class. That's important." And I, as you probably had to do, get your, security clearance and all of those things, and had the RCMP hanging around me too much. Anyway, got that, and off to Long Beach, California. And it was the craziest thing, Chris. We would write software. So our software was taking satellite readings. If there was more than 1 degree Celsius per kilometer of water, the sonars wouldn't go out of the submarines or the destroyers.
It was like that level of variation.
Yeah, it just bounced back. And so then you had to send a sonobuoy out, and we had a way to get that information to them really quick, and that was what I was working on. So I would program away and carry this little box of information. It was probably the size of a bread box, or maybe 2 bread boxes, and it had 5 megabytes. Nothing.
5 megabytes.
And I would go in, and those curtains they have at trade shows that block everything off. I'd go in the destroyer, and I would walk down there, and there was a sergeant at arms in front of me and one behind me, and go in and install my software, and didn't see anything, just do my job and come out. And then there was a pool at the back where they had jet fuel, I think B, and they would melt my hard drive into a puddle of aluminum. And
right on.
Right there.
Right there.
Right on base. And the sergeant at arms would sign a paper. I'd sign a paper. Yeah, see you tomorrow.
Right. And then you just rinse and repeat and do it again.
Do it again. It was the craziest thing. And then, so I did that for 2 years. And then there was a point when we were when I was asked to develop things that, well, I worked on the Tomahawk up in the Mackenzie Valley, and then they were asking me to do things that morally just didn't fit me. And I remember I went to a trade show, and the presentation booth that Hewlett Packard had at the time was affordability, reliability, and mortality. It just didn't.
What year was that?
1987.
It's amazing how much things can change. I mean, I just went to the big defense industry show here in Ottawa called CanSec, and can you imagine a major defense company having that up in a big billboard?
No, that was our whole thing, and then they brought me out as the prancing pony to show off what we were doing, and it's like, I got to get out of here. So I went back to the family oil business.
Okay,
and it was good. I think I brought back good information to the family business.
So when you say a family oil business, I don't know the oil business at all, but does that mean so you're pumping the oil and selling it to one of the major companies? They actually have a company that's refining? Like, what was the actual...
So from beginning to end, you need to have access to mineral rights. You can own them or you can lease them. And we did both. And so then you have the right to drill an oil well. And then you may or may not discover oil. When you discover oil, you sell it in our case, we always sold it. We didn't sell to a refinery. We sold it to a broker, and then he sold it to a refinery. But there was a standard price, so it was fairly well respected. We did that.
Does your family own the infrastructure? Does somebody else come in and put in the infrastructure to get the oil out of the ground?
Yes, we contracted other people to install and operate that infrastructure, but we owned it. And then we went, I decided to expand the company a lot more. And we went public on the Toronto Stock Exchange and then on the New York Stock Exchange.
So what was your role at this point? If you're talking about you're expanding the company, what role were you filling?
The CEO.
Oh, okay. So you came back from Hewlett Packard, and then did you go into the CEO role?
Not immediately. I went in as an engineer, and then, after a couple of years, worked my way up. And then we built a company that had oil production on 4 continents, and we were quite prominent around Edmonton. And how long were you in Edmonton?
First time 4 years, second time 2 years.
Okay, so you know about our winters.
I do. What was the name of the company, Wayne?
It was called LVR. So we did lots of expansions, and then we sold it to some Norwegian people. And then I took a couple of years just for reflection, and went back to agriculture and food, which is my roots.
What happened after that? What did you decide to do? How did you, in fact, maybe we can start off by talking about you mentioned you took a year or two to sort of reflect.
Yeah, I took a better part of a year to reflect, and spent a lot of time in the woods and a lot of time with my son, who was young at the time. And we had some really good bonding. It was a lot of fun, and decided that Heather and I would start an engineering company. And there were some skills that we had learned at our oil company and that she had learned at her employer, and that people wanted and they were valuable. And it was about data acquisition and processing. And so we at the latter part of that reflection, we decided to visit one of the babysitters. So in Europe, the boys go in the military typically for a year after high school, and then the girls take what they call a gap year. And they quite often go around somewhere in the world and be a nanny. And we had a young lady from Germany who came and wanted to improve her English and was babysitting, and her parents had a nice summer house in Italy. And so we went to Italy. And as we were riding around, we met up with 2 people from Regina, and she was an engineer. She had just graduated. And we had a really nice time. And my rule for entertaining a young student or recent graduate, is I buy, and then you have to buy when you find a student. And so anyway, we met up with Jody there and had a really good time. And then we got back to Canada, and she was our first employee. There's where that all has gone. And then a lot of these skills were wanted and needed by international oil companies. And so we worked for companies like British Petroleum and Chevron and, the big guys. And so that led us to a lot of different places, starting with Aberdeen, Scotland. And so we had an office there and had several Canadian employees that went over there. And we had, I think, at the one time, 3 apartments just to keep everybody comfortable. And we were, what was started as a 1-month contract, turned into 7 years.
Okay. So what year was this? And I asked because was this really early on in sort of data and digital?
No.
Okay.
No, it was well known, but the oil and gas sector, because there's so much money in that sector, there's really no incentive to be really super efficient. And, here's an example. You might have a floating rig out in the North Sea and have many wells off of that floating platform. And some of those wells might have different ownership percentages. And you're also pumping out 3 different components. You could call it 4. There's oil, water, and gas. And you have to really keep track of that. And they weren't. And there was one case where we were, as soon as we were using the data, we were able to point out to one customer that they were losing almost $8 million a week.
Wow.
Because they were. And then the real issue, another real issue, was that there had been a lot of amalgamation in the oil industry. And so these large companies had bought up smaller companies' interests and consolidated them. And not everybody, but many were using different data systems. And the problem with that is there's a lot of room for human error. And so there's measurements being taken at the well site, for example, and then somebody takes that and puts it into a spreadsheet and mails it to the local office, and then it gets put into digital form, maybe, or gets sent on to head office and put into digital form. And because of that, there's such a time delay, like from when a problem occurred or success occurred, it could take 60 days to get up the tree. And, these companies engaged us to the CEO and the CFO should be able to push a button and say, how much oil did we produce today? That's pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
It takes work to get it done, but they should have that. And then we discovered that there's this, guys that are younger than me even, kind of 45 years old. And it's like, hey, this is how we do it. And I don't want to learn to do it another way. And so it was a bit of psychology involved. And I remember one guy going out to take a reading off of a rig in the North Sea, and it was cold and windy. And I said, I can do that right here. You don't even have to put your boots on. And we won him over. And then I said, and there's going to be a point when the technology is just going to do that for you and take that information that you would have gathered. It's going to go right up seamlessly up the tree. And he said, well, will I lose my job? And I said, no, you need to be here. If there is a problem, someone's got to resolve it. So it's just going to make your life more comfortable and more reliable. So there was very often that resistance between different companies.
Did you find at all that was unique to oil and gas? I mean, you're just talking about a company losing $8 million a week in inefficiencies because, you know what, I just don't like change. Is that unique to that industry, or did you see it in other places?
No, we saw it everywhere.
Oh,
and
okay.
I'll get to that when we went into other industries. And so, again, we did that. We had offices in New Orleans for many years, working for the Gulf of Mexico, in the Gulf of Mexico, offices and apartments in Houston, Texas, and in, trying to remember the name of the place, Bakersfield, California. So we grow the company, we become probably at that time 35 engineers and keep pushing forward.
All data. This is a data company.
This is a data company.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then we were very, how do I say, susceptible to the price of oil. So when the price of oil went down, many of their budgets, would just be slashed, and we'd be left there with projects half done that had no funding. And so we made a real conscious decision that what we learned in oil and gas can be applied in other places. So we at that time, our business was probably 80% oil and gas and 20% others. We never did have to do any layoffs. And I'll tell you an interesting story about Houston, Texas, because it was in the offices of Chevron, and there were many, many subcontractors. IBM was there. We were there, and we saw the price of oil taking a plunge, and went to Chevron and said, okay, look, our rate is this per hour. We're going to knock $50 an hour off of it when the oil price is less than $70. And so thank you. It was great. I think there was about 400 people on that floor. And IBM even had the gall to increase their prices. Well, this is our annual price raise. And they were all gone. Our 4 people were the only ones left. And so it's, again, be proactive about anything. It's just the best. So then, so we took in other industries. We took on refining, which isn't, it's just a fee-for-service business in refining. It doesn't matter what the price of oil is. They buy the oil for X and they sell it for X plus $10 to refine it. So that gave us a lot of stability. Here in Saskatchewan, we have about 37% of the world's reserves of potash.
Right.
In fact, the head office is just right next door.
Can you explain to the listener, Wayne, what potash is and what it's used for?
Yeah, potash is a fertilizer, and it's trying to remember the chemical name for it. It's kaolin. That's what it is. And it's residue of great seas that were millions of years ago. So there's mines. There's 2 ways to mine it. They could build a typical shaft and tunnel system and extract it that way. And in areas where it's deeper and that's expensive, they'll do solution mining. It's a salt. So they go in with, drill an oil well essentially and spray water around and, and then just come up and dry it out, pump it up and dry it out. So that's the 2 methods that are being used. Nutrien is a Saskatchewan company. It actually came out of a Crown Corporation originally, and they're a miner. And then we have Mosaic, which is co-owned by the Cargill Group, and they have several mines. BHP from Australia also have a large mine here. It'll be the largest. It's just being commissioned right now, and it'll be the largest potash mine in the world. So we got 37% of it. So we really started working with the potash companies and showing them how data could make things much safer for their people. So they don't have to put so many people underground.
Right.
And they know where they are and what they're doing. And so then, so we added potash to the portfolio, refining, and then pipelines. And it's amazing that they didn't have this. Well, I'll go back to the old school and how it was done before. They would actually hire helicopters and planes to fly the pipeline route, on a regular basis every 2 days, maybe, just to see if there was a spill.
Like a visual inspection.
Visual inspection. And it's not cost effective. And if you got a leak, you need to know right now.
Yeah.
And so we showed them. I mean, and I don't want to name the company because it's embarrassing for them. But I'll just say that the biggest pipeline company in Canada. They, they didn't know if put 100 barrels in here and only 90 came out there, you got a problem. And you got to deal with it right now. And, when you're going to have activists like your daughter out there, good. You just can't spill oil. And so that was the work we did with that pipeline company, was really automating that process so they didn't have to do a visual inspection. The data would come to them immediately. And if at any point in the process there was a minus, it's like, stop the process.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're getting a reduced flow between A and B, I mean, you have a problem.
Yeah. So now we also do work for the government of Saskatchewan now. We had not done work for them, but just managing their fleets so they know when vehicle A needs, when it was bought, who was driving it, how fast they were driving it.
Yeah.
and when the oil needs to be changed and when it needs to be traded in. And you can have one guy. Again, this is Saskatchewan. You can't go out on a 40 below day in February and do visual inspections on a car. You can bring the car in the shop and then the guys. And this way we can, statistically, we know what's going to happen to these various vehicles. And it's not just cars. It's cars, trucks, graders, a whole litany of equipment. And then we were also doing work for a city just very close to my cottage. And one of their biggest expenses, they didn't realize it, we had to point it out to them, is water loss. And again, it's the same technology, a little bit reversed, but they're pumping water in. They know they're losing some, but they don't know how much. And so they don't know how much to charge the customer and then set the water rates. They don't know where to go and try to fix it. And if you can have a various, at least you can reduce the places they have to look. And so that's that. And we're also doing their fleet management as well. And so partway along, I got asked to do a very interesting, and now I'm stepping back in time quite a bit. So this would be 2002. I got asked to do a project in Cuba.
Okay.
And
who asked you?
I'll tell the story.
Okay.
So I had visited Cuba with our deputy minister, and he's always been a fan of Cuba, and not politically, but just going there. And so one of the things when you go with a minister, they put you in the protocol house. And we got to know the people at the protocol house and have remained friends. And in fact, I had them up here just last August. So we get to know them very well. And he invites the minister of mining, agriculture, petroleum, and hotels. And he's always one guy. And he and his entourage came to Saskatchewan, and they were touring oil and gas facilities in Lloydminster, which is in the northeast. And they came, the deputy premier phoned me and said, "Wait, I'm tied up today." And they're supposed to take him down to Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and show him around there.
Your old stomping grounds.
Yeah. And I said, we're in the car driving down. And I said, Cabricist, do you really want to go and watch an oil well go up and down? They're all the same. It's like nothing to see. And I said, why don't you come to my farm and we'll have a barbecue? So I phoned up my mom and I said, call the caterers, get them out there with some pork, some rice, and get some beer. And so you don't have to do any work. And it was one of these beautiful days, it's just magic. And we sat in the back yard and ate pork and listened to music and drank beer. And so but I did take them on a farm tour. And, they were very impressed with that. And, farms in Western Canada, the owner typically is also the tractor driver and is also the electrician. And, it's a tasking thing. So that was it, and we had a great day. And my brother was harvesting, and we went back to their hotel, and they flew home. So then that would have been in the fall, like October, September. And in the spring, I got a call from the Cuban ambassador to Canada, and he said, I'm going to go out to Calgary Stampede. I want you to come out. So we flew out and had dinner with him, and he said, look, you're formally invited to put together an agriculture project in Cuba. And what had gone on in Cuba was that with one stroke of a pen, I'll step back in history. So Cuba in the sugar industry was being subsidized by Russia, Soviet Union. 1991, Soviet Union breaks down, and no more subsidies. And somebody pointed out to them, they do their accounting different than we do. It's not full-scale accounting. So they would look at the sugar mills making money, but that there was fuel costs. Well, no, that's a different department. That's not us, because it's, in a communist system, it's all under one basket. So anyway, it was pointed out to them that they were losing, 90 cents on every pound of sugar, or on every ton of sugar. There was some number on every ton. So with one stroke of a pen, Fidel Castro shut down 87% of the sugar production in Cuba. Cuba actually imports sugar now from Colombia. So we get down there and we look at some different lands and put together a program. And the other thing that's is bizarre is because they don't have a system that seems to work for agriculture in their context. So they have 7 million vacant hectares of land, and they spend about $3 billion importing protein products, food. And so we looked at a lot of different crops, what are suitable in that tropical climate, and back and forth, and came to the conclusion that the fastest way to protein is through soybeans. I didn't have any experience growing soybeans, but we found somebody. And there's lots of good genetics in Brazil, which has a very similar economy. So we selected 1,500 hectares and seeded it to soybeans and harvested it. And they were very impressed with that. Later on, we got approached by the military, because there's two parallel systems in Cuba. There's the regular system that has ministries, and then there's the military. And the military runs about half of the economy, and they have it as contingency for their own needs, but they also do some work for the state.
Okay.
That light there again. Yeah. And so then there was a very large project, and it was 40,000 hectares of irrigated soybeans in the center of Cuba. And there had been an old farm there. And so we signed a contract with the military. I actually signed that contract with the only... Do you remember when the Cessna got shot down over Cuba? They were going and landing on the road and picking up people and dropping leaflets and doing all sorts of nasty. It was a bunch of Cuban Americans. And so the only guy who was ever convicted for that crime was General Ruben Fuente and General Martinez. He then he became in charge of all agriculture in Cuba. But he was the guy that pushed the button that sent the missile up. And obviously he didn't do that without permission. And so that was, I still have photos of signing that contract. So then we put a team together and started building the infrastructure and things that we needed in Cuba. And so our group, and I was the head of the group actually, but I'm able to say that I actually spent $230 million of Fidel Castro's money and lived to talk about it.
Not many have, I'm sure.
No, but we had good results.
Is soy still a big crop for Cuba? Do they use it internally? Do they export? Like, how did this all manifest itself once it was up and running?
Well, the next step was Fidel Castro had authored a paper called The Mechanical Cow. And because typically how soybeans are processed is you feed it to an animal, and then that animal gives you milk or meat. And it's very inefficient. It's about 10 to 1. So you put 10 kilos of protein into a cow and you get 1 out. 5 to 1 for pork and 3 to 1 for chickens.
Okay.
And he just didn't want that. There's got to be a mechanical way to do it. So he sent us on a search for a mechanical cow. I happened to have met a guy in Ukraine, a former scientist who was working in the, he was working on research, but they had developed a system for putting in U.S. subs, about a third of the capacity is for garbage storage, because you can't just jettison it out. Everybody knows where you are. Can't grind it up because everybody will hear where you are. So it's just storage. But the Soviet Union had developed a way using hydrodynamic cavitation. And what it does is it's just a venturi, and it creates millions of bubbles that create sonic waves. And as particles pass through them, it destroys them. And, you circulate it around. So they, in a cooler class sub, probably only 10% is for storage.
That's a huge difference.
And so, huge difference. So Soviet Union breaks down, and all these scientists run with their ideas and papers to the United States and get patents.
Okay.
And so I had met this guy in Ukraine. I called Sergey up. He came over to Canada, and I said, "Can we sign you up for a contract, a contract or a usage agreement?" And he said yes. And so we signed that, and then took some of that technology. And at that time, the military realized that we were getting a little bit too much control, and they bought us out. And so we walked away with our skins, and we didn't make a big profit, but we did get the technology. And so then I spent a lot of time with engineers advancing that technology. Like, it shouldn't just work and be good for Cuba; it should be good for everybody. And we can process different grains with it. And so we developed and patented different processes, and built a factory. In fact, we built a factory in Dominican Republic because they had a milk program there for school, and we could do it much, much cheaper than they could pay somebody else to do it.
What grains were you looking at beyond soy?
We, soy, oats, wheat. They didn't have any wheat in the Dominican Republic, but corn, lots of corn. That's a good balance, actually, because you can't just feed kids protein that are hungry. They'll just bloat up. You need carbohydrates in there as well. So advanced that and built this factory in the Dominican Republic, and trying to remember the name of the hurricane. I think it was Andrew. But yeah. It comes through Haiti, and we're right next door, and I get a call from our ambassador, and can you get some food over here?
So this you'd set this factory up in Dominican, and it was a for-profit company.
Yeah.
And you were focused on, so what was it actually outputting?
Milk.
Okay. Milk from soy, from oats.
Soy and corn.
Soy and corn. Okay.
The World Food Program, when they hand out these rations that you see, it's called the CSB or WSB. So wheat, soy blend, corn, soy blend. And then you can add supplements into it, depending on the specific need of the community or the geographical conditions and the genetic disposition of people.
And who was your typical client? Was it in the DR, or was it shipped globally?
We did one global shipment, and we made 100,000 servings for China. Somebody in China.
The rest of it was all domestic in the DR.
Yeah. And that was the other thing that is nice about this. The technology we developed, it's very small. It could fit in a 20-foot sea can. Whereas most typical milk producing facilities are huge. And we had bought an interest in one in Oskaloosa, Iowa. And I think we needed 100,000 acres under contract just to turn the thing on.
Okay.
Yeah. And this, we needed 1,000 acres under contract to make it work. So again, micro-sized. We did two things in the Dominican. I really wanted to prove out the technology and make sure it worked. And labor costs were lower there, and we could get a bit of revenue from the Ministry of Education for their school program. And so we set up there. So I get a call from our Canadian ambassador in Haiti, and she said, "Can you get some food over here?" And I said, "Yeah, I can," but we didn't have a packaging option at that time, and she didn't want it in packages because it becomes a commodity. It's like cigarettes in a jail, and so we figured out a way to create a cold chain all the way from our factory into Haiti using a refrigerated truck and totes, and we had a bunch of young guys from Canada down there working. I didn't want them going across the border. And so I did that myself. I had a driver, and then they gave us. I wish I had a picture. They gave us the military. No, it wasn't the military. It was the National Police Force. Gave us a series of goons to be on all sides of us, just
right
for protection. It was food. People were starving, and we would drive out to schools and set up a. We had designed. I was sitting in the hotel one night thinking, hell are we going to dispense this? And then I thought, it was pretty good. I'm sitting at the bar and looking at the tap. I think, well, Heineken is pretty good at that. So I talked to the local beer company in Haiti, and I said, can you weld up 2 tanks? And I need a spigot on the front, and then I'll just change it. And it has to be that I can take it off. So I'll just get it cleaned every day and dispense cold milk to the kids until it's gone. And that way it would just be in a cup. Kids had to put the cup back into the sanitizer. And that's how we dispensed it. And then the word got out, and the United Nations phoned and said, we've got a problem. We got a bunch of prisoners that aren't being fed. The budget got stolen by the Minister of Prisons or whatever. And she's left the country. And these guys have no food. The conditions in there were horrific. And actually, that's the prison that was in the news recently that all those people escaped out of. And each prisoner, I think, had, when they were all in their cells, and they had a yard, but when they were put in their cells, I think it was about 13 inches by 13 inches, I calculated. And so they would take turns laying down, and the rest were, standing up. It was just, and I found out later, because the ambassador and I did quite a bit of work on this. About half of those guys were political prisoners and had never even seen a judge, because there you have to pay to see a judge.
You have to pay.
If you don't have any money, yeah. And so, and another thing, we looked at, like, lots of these guys were in there. They hadn't seen a judge. They hadn't been charged, but they were still incarcerated. most of them had done more time than if they had received the most difficult sentence for their crime. You stole a goat, that's 2 years in jail. This guy had been there 4 years.
You have to pay to see a judge.
Yeah. And so one day I'm coming to Haiti from Canada, and I sit down on Air Canada, and this guy walks in with a full uniform on. And I know when you're wearing a full uniform on an airplane, it's official. And Canadian Armed Forces were so cheap, they bought him an economy ticket in a middle aisle, in a middle seat.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky. I get privileges with Air Canada. They have me at business class. And so I whispered to the flight attendant, I said, that guy back there, something's official. I said, I'll swap seats with him. So he deserves to sit up here. And then she looked at me, she says, I got an extra breakfast on board. I'll just give him a seat beside you. And Mark Gasparotto came into my life.
Oh, really? Is that how that all transpired?
So that's how he walked into my life. And we had lots of interesting adventures, as you can imagine. And one of them, we got invited by the ambassador to come to a dinner party, which was a fundraiser. And there are some wealthy people in Haiti, incredibly wealthy. That's where they steal all the money.
Yeah.
And so Mark and I go there, and he said, I'll pick you up, because he had a good vehicle, and 2 soldiers from the Philippines with him. And so it's good security. We go to this home, and I'm very underdressed. I'll just say that. Got my khakis on, and so I'm looking around, and there's a guy in the kitchen. He's got jeans. So I thought, I'm going to see him. So I'm talking to him, and he said, can you help me cutting these grapefruits? And I said, yeah, sure. So I'm cutting the grapefruits, and I didn't know who he was. It's Jose Andres.
I don't know who that is.
Okay, World Kitchen. He's one of the most famous chefs. Him and Anthony Bourdain.
Right.
Did a lot of stuff together. And you'll see him wherever there's a disaster. He owns about 20 restaurants in the United States. And he...
is he Spanish?
Born in Spain, lives in the United States now.
Okay. Yeah, I know who he is.
Yeah. And anyway, so everybody's kind of cheesed off that I'm talking to this guy. I didn't know any different. And then they give me a place way down at the end of the table because I'm a bit scruffy. and he said, no, I want that guy up here by me. So that really cheesed somebody off. Had to give up their ringside seat. Anyway, everyone leaves, and the ambassador and Jose Andres and Mark and I sat and smoked a cigar out in the backyard.
Very cool.
It was a great experience.
Hey, Wayne. I don't want to forget this, but so you're delivering milk into Haiti. How long did you do that for, and how much did the company donate?
We donated all of it. Let me think. Did that over a 4 or 5 month period. I think there was 400,000 servings in all.
Wow.
Mostly going to schools and to the prison.
Was that sort of the end of the experiment in the DR? Is after you sort of concluded operations in Haiti?
Well, we did some work for some other people in DR. It was mostly research work. Did for Coca-Cola. They have their large conglomerate, Citrico, and we did a lot of research work for them. And that was leading. So this gets us close to the pandemic. And one thing we had never calculated in our risk assessment business plan was that a pandemic and nobody could travel. And we had people going back and forth all the time. So, and there's a great story on CBC about this. It would have been around Christmas 2 years ago. So our plant manager, Dominican, gets COVID and really goes down hard and can't work anymore. Young guy, 38 years old, but just genetically, his whole family, his mother died, his sister lost an arm to it. It's just nasty. So we got nobody there. The accountant, she's there. And so this is where the CBC story starts. So we decided, okay, this pandemic is not just 3 weeks. It's going to go on for a long time. And let's disassemble that machine, that factory, containerize it, and bring it to Saskatoon, because there's a food center just down the river here, and it will work from here. So this young lady, she was just 30, maybe 32. Wasn't there when the factory was built. Didn't speak English, and was an accountant. We had video calls with her every morning. There's another two engineers and I, and we give her tasks for the day. And she had a little label, and she would go and put it on we take this off first. And then she would instruct the construction company that we had engaged, and they would package it and containerize it. And I think there was close to 10,000 pieces. And it arrived on New Year's Eve, to Saskatoon. And she had inventoried it so well that it went through customs in a flash, not one piece missing. And then we did the process of reassembling it here and modifying it and making it different. And so my, I think I told you Heather had a brain hemorrhage.
I'm not sure you did.
Okay, yeah. So Heather goes down with a brain hemorrhage and needs a lot of help. She's doing well now, just so you know.
Good.
But it was a year and a half out of my life, and
so some guys during the pandemic.
Depends when you call the pandemic over. I got somebody in our company has COVID today.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So we reassemble the plant, we get it functional, and some guys walk in and they're putting together a food company, and they say, "Is this number okay to buy it?" And I said, "Perfect timing." So food company finished. And so that's kind of one branch. Engineering company just carried on and doing what they're doing. And Heather has been the CEO there. We had an acting CEO for a long period of time. And there's the kind of the story, the business story.
The story of taking that apart in Dominican Republic sounds a little bit like Apollo 13, where the engineers are telling the astronauts, okay, you need to do this, and then do this, and then do this.
Dump that bag of stuff on the table.
Right. Yeah. That's all we have to work with.
Well, and I'm trying to remember which movie it is. Anyway, they're going to shoot up a Gemini. I think it's Apollo 13. They're going to shoot up a Gemini capsule, and there's something wrong with the door. And so the astronauts go and they fix it. They said, "Oh, it was a lot easier when you could just phone up old man Douglas, and he'd come and fix it." Then they'd have a barbecue and jump in. We're going for a ride.
So that you sort of dance between. I mean, there was business side there, but is the work you did in Haiti, was that your first sort of foray into the charitable sector, into philanthropic work?
Yeah, internationally, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We do a lot of charity work here in the province. And, during the pandemic, for example, here it is right here. I wrote a book called COVID Comfort Cooking. And I had a lot of time. I wasn't traveling. And I made, out of my kitchen, 3,400 meals. A friend of mine was running a center for really challenged kids, and whose parents really weren't being around. They were being looked after by an aunt or an uncle, and the kids couldn't come there, and there was no food. So I took on 27 mouths, and I forced myself to drive out there 2 times a week to their homes, because it's only a mile and a half where I sleep in luxury, and conditions are really, really hard. And so that was my project. And then I thought, well, I got some extra time, I'll document it and write a little cookbook and give it to some friends. So Mark Scala.
Now, so I'm always curious about like what compels people to spend their time, their resources, whatever it is, to do things that are charitable, and then how they determine what they want to do. Because there's always going to be so many worthwhile causes out there. So what was your motivation? What compelled you, and how did you pick?
I was asked by my friends, but I'm just going to read to you something in the prologue here when I wrote this. Additionally, I have the good fortune to be able to provide more than 1,400 people to some of our city's most needy during the pandemic. Opened my eye to the extreme poverty that exists only 1 mile from where I sleep each night. I have been gifted to see and hear the gratitude for the simple task of providing a healthy, warm meal to families in need. And I ask people, please, if you find ways to help, share in your own way, in your community. It's a gift that gives back tenfold. And I wasn't looking for the tenfold. It just, that happened. And so then through this journey, I got, and so this is while I'm building this food company. I had some incredible meetings with interesting people. And I got asked to come to Mexico, and we took some machinery down there and did demonstrations for the Minister of Health and the Minister of Education, and that didn't really go anywhere. And then I got asked to go to Nicaragua. To Nicaragua, and I spent a lot of time with Humberto Ortega. And I don't know if you know who he is, and we've become very good, close friends.
Really?
And took my son out to his house a couple of times, and we go out for dinner, and it's very. And I shared this with Mark, and I had believed before that people don't change. And Humberto tells this story. He was 24 years old, and he started a revolution. He and his brother. So he was the fighter guy, and they were both fighters. And so he didn't think it through that. Yeah, we'll get the weekends off. We don't have to fight. He said, no, you fight till you're dead or they're dead. That's how revolution goes. And so he went through that, and it was vicious. The Sandinistas and the Contras, and the war is over. They win, and realize they don't know how to run a country.
Right. Now you got to govern.
Yeah, now you got to govern. So they were wise, and they sent Humberto, Daniel, his brother, sent Humberto to see Boltedano, who was kind of the leader of what remained. He said, Humberto took my son and I to this room where this happened, and that he had to phone him up, and he had killed some of his family, and Boltedano had killed some of the Ortega family. And here's these two men, they have to meet. And they sit down in a room, and another friend of mine was there. He was kind of the moderator, and there was, I think, a group of 6 of them. And Humberto said, okay, you can run the economy. I'm going to keep the military, just in case. and then Danielle will be the president and do the international stuff. So that was the agreement, and I met both of those men.
And how?
Not in that room, but at different times. Boltedano was still alive, and Humberto, of course, and the moderator was an Italian guy, and he believed in food. And I think in here I read a little bit about what he made them do was he didn't let anybody order their own meal, because his belief was if you share food with somebody, it's so primal that they start to not hate each other.
What were you invited down there for in the first place?
To see if we could put some machinery and do their school program.
Okay.
But they just didn't have the budget for it.
Right.
But then Humberto and I just kind of continued on, and one night we had gone out to his ranch, and I had an interpreter with me. I do speak Spanish, but she came along, and then we had the pleasantries, and he said, Maite, you got to sit over there, and Wayne and I are going to go resolve something over here. So we're kind of, she can see this vigorous conversation going back and forth, and we're not yelling at each other, but nah. And she came back, and she said, when I came back, she said, what were you guys scrapping about over there? Oh, which is the best way to cook a tenderloin? He said, no, you got to pour blood over it. I was like, no, Montreal steak spice.
And what have your focuses been, or maybe So you talked about the food program during the pandemic. I mean, are there
Yes.
other things that are sort of close to your heart in terms of charities or causes?
Well, there's the kids in Regina, um, and have this is opera, and so I volunteer for the opera. I just love opera music.
Where did that come from?
Musical. My family is kind of bipolar, and when I say that, I have sisters that are. I have one sister is actually an opera singer. I had an aunt who was a cellist and went to Juilliard from a little farm in Saskatchewan. Imagine what a change that was. And that was back just after the war.
Yeah.
Great. And so those are kind of the things that are really close to my heart. And that's what I spend time and resources and get joy out of.
So there's probably a couple of things I'd be interested in your opinion on. And maybe the first one is just the value of service. So from your perspective, I mean, what do you think the value of service is for Canadians, for any citizens of any nation? Why do you think that's important, that people need to find a way to serve in some way? And that could be volunteering all the way up to join the military, the police, being a nurse, whatever.
Here's something that I do. Just 2 blocks down from where I'm sitting right now is a place called Life House. And it was set up, and you've got a lot of problems with drug use, HIV/AIDS, homelessness, and just the look, the simple thing. Look one of those people in the eye. Say good morning, and it's really cool. And we've got a lady here who is running a foundation to help fund that and other things. And what she's done is mind-blowing. And that she's conscripted some very prominent people in the community to spend a night with those homeless people. And, not when it's 40 below, but, and one of the tasks they have to each accomplish is to panhandle, to approach somebody and have to ask them for money. And these guys, people, chancellor of the university, CEO of one of the potash companies, they just said it was the greatest experience ever. So how do you get people doing it? It should be part of everybody's day, like just kindness. And, it's like shaving every morning. You should, take 5 minutes just to be kind. And, I think people get caught up in trying to save everything. And I think there's a great line from a song, and my father just loved it. Men go crazy in congregation. They can only get better one by one. So if you don't have to fix it all. Just smile at a person, make a meal, take somebody, volunteer for something, or join the forces. And so I think there's that concept that, I can't fix it all, so I'm not going to fix anything. And I'm going to get rid of that, or advocate. I'm certain that this lady, that's why she got these prominent people to go and experience that, so they'd be good advocates. They'll probably give good money too, but I think that we need to do a lot more advocacy. That's why I made this book. I made a few hundred copies of it and passed it out to people. And the prologue is right there, why I did it. There's not a picture of me in it. It's not about me.
Yeah.
It's about the kids and the lady who did who took the time. She was born into a very wealthy family, and spent her whole life looking after these young kids. I have one terrible story about that experience. So one of my families, Alice, had 3 grandchildren. The parent generation had disappeared, and 2 cousins that she was looking after. And when I met her, she had stage 4 cancer. So I knew I was going to have to say goodbye to Alice. And but I went there frequently and, dropped food and had a little conversation, chit-chat. And I show up there, and she's an elderly lady. That was the other thing. I showed up there one day, and a squad car is there. And no, she didn't die of cancer. Somebody murdered her. Somebody had taken some drugs and went to the wrong address. And
right.
I asked the police, I said, does she have morphine or something there? Maybe they're trying to get that. No. This wrong address. Social services came and split up the kids because she had told me, no, I have to stay alive. I cannot die of cancer because I got to look after these kids. And some jackass murders her. I was pissed off that day. Sorry to swear on your. It took me a while to get over that. I was pissed for 3 or 4 days.
Is there any? Are there any like messages or issues that you wanted to share with the listeners?
Well, have consequences of our decisions, and be sure you think about that. And another thing my father always says: "But for the grace of God, go I." I could have made some bad decisions when I was in my youth. I did make some bad ones, but I didn't. I was fortunate. I was really lucky. I had good mentors, teachers, and if you can give a young person a nudge, just say, you don't have to chew them out, but just say, hey, I think, have you thought about this? And so I got lots of nudges on the way up.
Yeah, nobody does it alone.
No. I'll tell you a fun story about a guy. And this is intervention is important. And so when I was young, he was a couple of years older than me, and his parents were deceased. And so he was 18, and he came to live with Grandma Jones. And she's 80. So, that you can see right away there's going to be a problem. And he was getting into a lot of trouble. And Weyburn is 10,000 people at that time. He decided he needed some new tires. So he went to the curling rink where everybody was and found a good set of tires, jacked up the car and stole the tires. Well, in a small community, it doesn't take Columbo to figure it out.
Sure.
And so he had been in trouble before for other things. So the community assembled, and the principal of the high school, some businessmen, including my father, the police chief, and the fire department. I sat him down, and he said, I can say his first name, Glenn, you're busted. So there's 2 things. You're going to go down 1 or 2 roads tonight. We're going to arrest you and put you in jail. And you're going to go to jail and probably be somebody's boyfriend and probably die before you're 30. Or you can turn your life over to us and we'll control it, and you'll just carry on. And so he made the right decision. He actually came out to our farm, and they thought getting him away from the community or his bad influences was a good idea, and get him really tired every day. And he started reading the Grapes of Wrath.
Okay.
And so he and I would be working out in the field somewhere, and he would tell me the chapter he had read the night before about it. And we became very good friends. Anyway, he became a prominent lawyer in Regina, raised 4 wonderful daughters.
Amazing.
And it's just that, and it was just that nudge one night.
Yeah. It's compassion. The town showed him compassion. I mean, he had to make a choice, but they showed him compassion and gave him an option that many wouldn't have.
Well, now I don't think there is many options given. Police see something go wrong, and they're so busy they just chuck them in jail and next. And and that is an advantage of a small town. You can actually know that person.
Wayne, this has been a wonderful discussion. I've certainly learned a lot from you. And I really appreciate your philanthropy, not just in Canada, but around the world. And I think you could certainly provide inspiration to many people who are looking to citizen better and find ways to serve. So thank you very much for being one of our Northern Sentinel. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Wayne. Please subscribe to The Greater Good on Substack to get this and other content to help you citizen better. Thanks for listening, and goodbye until next time.